Welcome to the first in a series of several conversations around the future of education by Baobab College, Zambia. Welcome to our first step into the world, and we hope to make this a very, very interactive event. Well, today we decided to make a difference. We feel this subject is so important because we believe as Baobab that we are looking into the future and need to understand where the world is going. We have to go out into the world. Why have we decided to do this? Have a discussion about the future of education. I shall start with Mr. Mono, George Mono.
Thank you very much, Chana. Education is one industry that you cannot suspend even for one day. And most importantly, I feel that at the moment, perhaps there's little interaction between industry and education. We are at your service. We need to know what your requirements are. And I think this is where this particular interaction takes a very prominent role.
Bernadette Mwate, and why you think today is so important?
I'm also a parent. It's very imperative that we look at this because we are actually developing children that will run the future.
Thank you, Bernadette.
Like Bernadette, I'm also a parent with a child in year 3. And it's important that, as George has also alluded to invite and to engage with different stakeholders.
Thank you. Laura.
I have worked extensively in primary school and I've been working with teenagers. And I've got 3 children of my own. If we don't prepare them for the necessary skills for the future, then they're going to struggle in adult life.
This is Ruth Noble, our principal.
Thank you very much. I was reflecting on what I was going to say, and I just wanted to say it was actually 30 years ago that I made the decision to come into this profession, and I've never looked back. It's absolutely a privilege to serve the people in the education industry. And I really love what I do. And I think it drives you to want to have the best for the children who are in your care. And if I could sort of summarize the future, there's a lot changing. There's a paradigm shift that's happened and is happening and continues to happen. And I really take the stance of there is change coming, but we have to be careful. We have to say which bits of those change are going to work for us. And what is the best of the past that we need to hold on to and marry that together for the education for the future that we can provide. And I'll just end on one of my phrases that I think a lot of people hear me say that I've particularly sums up my feelings for education, is that we often say, what world are we leaving our children to? Have you heard of that phrase? Yeah, everyone gets worried that we're not going to leave a world to our children that's what we inherited ourselves, and it's our responsibility to make the world a better place. I turn that on its head, and I would say, well, what children are we leaving the world to? What are the children going to be that inherit the world? And that's what education is, and the future of education is. What are the values? And what are the skills that those children will need in order for them to carry the torch of humanity into the future?
What has really changed in education from your knowledge experience? What has really changed? And how do we keep the good things? And what do you think we need to do going forward?
I think so much has. I was just saying earlier about when we reflect on our own education, cast your mind back, we were possibly all of us taught in a classroom where we were sat in rows. We were lectured, we copied a lot of information down that we would then possibly never use again, or we would come back at some point in the future to try and then remember all of that fact and so on. If we needed to look up some information, we didn't have the internet. Who can remember Encyclopedia Britannica? But that's where we got our information. Education is adjusting a little bit in that regard in terms of how you're also assessed. But I think in the classroom, gone are the days where you would sit and you'd be lectured. You are now more engaged, you're more involved. We often talk about how at the end of one of our lessons, it shouldn't be us as teachers that are tired, it's the children, because they've been so busy, so much discussing their work, sharing ideas, working collaboratively. And as employers, as I'm sure many of you are, is that not the skills you look for the people you're going to be employing? Yes, you want them to have passed and have got the qualifications, but you're looking for creative thinking, for the ability to collaborate, to work as teams. And education is evolving in that regard.
And it's actually in some people's minds in education, it's not moving fast enough. Because if we look at other industries in the last 50 years or so, they have really embraced dynamic change. Education hasn't. And I often ask myself, well, why is that? And I often think, well, who are the stakeholders involved in education? Who are the decision makers about where education is going? And I just even look at myself. I'm in my 50s. I'm a policymaker in my own particular institution. I engage with others who are of a similar generation. Is it that our generation are creating what should be coming next? And I think there's a little bit of a warning sign when we look at that, because do we really know what our children need for a future that we don't know about? Not that we're becoming obsolete. I think wisdom and, experience are vital in leading that process. But I'm a strong believer engaging a lot of stakeholders. We talked about, children's voice is very important, but a very important voice that we need to hear from is industry and jobs. And I can tell you now from reading about this, there's a huge problem out there. There's a disconnect between what industry is wanting to employ and what education is providing. So therein lies the problem. But education is a very slow-moving institution. So we're not changing. And we need to change even faster, is my opinion, because the other industries are moving much faster.
Thank you for that. So I've got two questions on the back of that. And the first one is, it might lead back to technology. Has the student changed? Number one. And number two, why has education taken so much longer than any other industry, considering how key it is to everyone's lives? Why has it taken so much longer for education? Can I pose the first question to George on, so has the student changed?
I think the student has changed a great deal. Over the years, we're now students that are more dynamic, students that have a very loud voice, students that are dictating, what should happen, because they know what they want. Some of them, maybe, through their families, have already decided what careers they want to do. And as educationists, we must listen to them and prepare them for that future. So yes, there is massive change. John touched on the role of technology. Now they have access to information. And so they know exactly what they want to get out of a school. And the teacher, in this case, has to keep pace. And I think it places great pressure on us. We have to match up. We must provide them the skills that will help them realize their dreams. And for me, we must actually, get out of the classroom. We are preparing students for jobs that may not exist today. So teachers have to be incredibly creative. They have to think ahead of, where they are. And that is why perhaps this discussion takes on an incredibly important role.
Why did education lag on making changes, or why is it lagging in making changes?
I think I alluded to it before. It's the people within the system who make the change, don't they? And we're not of that generation. We have young teachers, of course, coming through, but it comes down to policymakers and people who need to connect with the younger generation coming through. I think that's one of the stalling blocks. But the other thing as well is that even in education, you have different stakeholders. It's a very complex industry. So as well as teachers and students, you also have parents. And everyone who is a parent is an expert in education because they've spent 18 to 25 years in education themselves. Okay. So all of your parents will come from a standpoint or an expectation of what school should be like. And to be honest, most of that is based on their own experience. If we're honest with ourselves, we would reflect on our own experience and thought, well, I turned out pretty well. So what's wrong with that? Maybe they should do the same thing. I had exams. Well, what are you complaining about? I managed, you managed too. There are some of the stumbling blocks that I see is that the partners within education, I think, live a little bit more in the past than in a future-looking way. And other industries are past that. They're all future-looking. They're customer-driven. They're sales-driven. They're industrial. Whereas education is a service that's providing to multiple stakeholders who all have quite ingrained, in-depth opinions of what it should be like. So to move that change and get that momentum is quite a job.
I think most of us can relate. So I don't know if anybody would like to contribute to that and their own experience with that, or looking back on their own education.
Education is indeed a very evolving. Yes, we are in times where you cannot tell your daughter or your son in school what they should become, because the education that they are confronting is already telling them what they ought to be. They have that feeling, I want to do this. And I think for me, the basic underlying word I wanted just to come out strongly is about evolution. It is evolving and it is confronting reality as it is in real time. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Just to concur, I think I'll throw it back to you as the educationist. What should we be doing? The world is changing. As rightfully stated by Mr. George, the student has changed. Have our academicians, our lecturers, our teachers, have they changed? Thank you.
Happy to, thank you. And it's an excellent point in there. In fact, we were talking about this as we were coming across here earlier, that many professions, not just in Zambia, but globally, Bernadette's in particular, have to undergo constant CPD throughout the annual year of how many hours they must log in a year. It's been really encouraging in the last couple of years that the teaching profession here in Zambia has taken that on as well. So all teachers, no matter which sector you're working with in the country, have to do mandatory so many hours of CPD every year. But now making it mandatory is helping enormously in that. And it's about how that comes in. And we believe very strongly that we have a role to play within that as well. The one big challenge will always be how it can be resourced in schools as well. I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but I see Mrs. Noble picking up her mic.
The key is a teacher, and it's about teacher training and about modern teacher training methods. I would say that really is the key.
There is a disconnect, if I should speak specifically, between government schools and international schools. It's got to change. It's got to move with the times, and we need to realize and recognize that. But there are certain jobs that perhaps demand a higher level sort of skills, and it looks like some schools are not providing those.
Thank you so much.
I have a child who's had a condition of ADHD. He went through 8 schools. Zambia needs to look at these special needs, and no school could look after this child. He's 22. Please understand special needs children. Not everyone wants to get a degree, but the workforce are also not realizing.
Thank you. But it's a topic for many schools, I think, and I would like to take this to Laura.
I wouldn't say you don't have to do the traditional sciences anymore. You can do the food tech, the travel and tourism, that everybody has a skill to offer. It doesn't matter what special need they've got. We've all got a special need of some sort, and we're all affected in one way or another from something. What we're trying to do is guide our children in a path that will actually equip them for future life, whether that's life skills, learning to cook, learning to manage their finances. If a child can do those basic things, then you're almost halfway there. Organizational skills, all these things that we as a school or schools across Zambia should be teaching our children.
Our schools, Zambian schools, not being inclusive enough. Our schools are not ready to cater for the needs of our customers. We have a service to provide, and it looks like we are not meeting the needs of our customers fully. We are segregating. So this is a core, really, if I hear you right, that schools need to be more inclusive.
Side of education has developed greatly in the last 10 years. And we basically have to almost, to a fact, catch up with it. When you're doing your teacher training, you really do have to say that every child is an individual. You have to look at every child as an individual. At Baobab, we are really looking now at the motto and the philosophy I've always tried to instill in the teachers that I have mentored is that we don't teach. If a child doesn't learn the way we teach, we must teach the way they learn. And it is a fundamental part of teacher training.
I want to go to certificates. Do we need them? Most of you are employing people. Some of you are employing people. Do you still look for that A grade in maths and A grade in English, even if that person's practical abilities and social abilities are so incredible? John, do they really need a certificate?
One of the biggest challenges is exactly that. As employers, we kind of still want our child or the people that we're going to employ to have the degree, to have the qualification, to have the certificate that says they can do what you want them to do. But at the same time, we want them to have collaborative skills, the ability to think outside the box, all of those sort of things. Schools can only change so far because they are confined by the parameters of what society expects of them to go through into the world of work.
Thanks. I'll just jump on the back of that. There are already major industry players in the world who don't look for qualifications. In fact, they disregard them and they have their own assessments. They do psychometric testing. They have away days where they analyze and see who you are, how can you work with people. And based on that, they will select the people who will come into the company. So change is happening there. And that tells me that a major stakeholder for education, which is the employer and industry, is actually rejecting what education is producing. So therein lies the change. It's from the top. Once that starts happening, universities start to wake up to make the change. Once they start changing, it's a trickle-down effect and it will come into schools.
In my role as a senior leader, I've also noticed that you can get a graduate that comes in with the highest scores, great transcript, but when you put them to work, the expectation from what they have on the paper and what they're actually giving the institution is quite different. So the world has changed, and globally it changed a long time ago.
Would anyone like to comment on that? Maybe in the workplace where you've also experienced the same, where practically the performance just is very different when they walk into the workplace, and already we're trying to look at how we manage that gap. I know, Ms. Piri, I'm sorry to point this out to you. You work in HR.
We're moving away from a complete reliance on qualifications as a certification to somebody's capabilities, not just the academic capabilities is what I'm referring to. So as I think it's Ruth who mentioned, I'm working for a multinational as well. We rely more on the psychometric, the internal assessments that we have to determine whether this will be a suitable employee. I think the other important dimension that that can sometimes be overlooked is the fit of the employee to the values and the cultures of the organization. That's coming out to be very core, very pertinent, and certainly from my experience, that's a key consideration. Thank you.
Can I throw this to the panel and I'll come back?
Start off. Okay. It's a question that strikes fear into most people. The school has so much more than just teaching and learning academics. So for me, the future of education is, yes, learning and your subjects they're going to be important, of course, still. And there's things like AI that will come in to support and computers that help with that. But for me, schools will always have a place in society. And the reason for that is they teach children values. They teach children socialization skills. And these are what are important for the children that we're going to leave the world to. They are more important than the knowledge and acquisition of subjects. So you can't get that on your own when you're learning in isolation. But nowadays, there's virtual schools. You put on a headset and you can be with other people in the virtual world. But are you actually having physical interactions, conversations, learning how we socialize? Human beings need human contact, and they need to learn those skills as a child. It's not something that you just get. You have to learn them. So for me, schools are here to stay.
There has actually been some research on the effects of COVID when schools came back, because children, and I'm sure teachers, just didn't know how to interact. And it took some time for them to get back and start playing with each other and remembering each other. So it just speaks to the point that, we are social animals, and it feels very unnatural to be living in isolation, no matter what.
Just recalls to my mind an incident that happened a couple of weeks back that was brought to my attention. We had a group of our younger primary students who just come off the field because the rains had finally arrived, and they'd come off the field soaked to the skin because they couldn't make it back to the class in time. And as a group of our older students walked past, 2 or 3 of them took off their jerseys, took off their blazers and put them on these younger students. You don't get that online. Those skills that are fundamental and what it means to the younger one to have that done to them, they'll then pay it forward in the future. The older ones, it's little things like that you don't get by being in a virtual classroom.
From when they started grade 1, they've always known the classroom. They've always known that teacher. Some kids are savvy, they can do online. But really, traditionally, for me, I couldn't do online.
So, Ruth, the classroom's not going anywhere for now.
We are living in this rat race, I feel. And sometimes it's easier to give a device to a child and say, here's an iPad or here's a phone, or just play on this for a minute, rather than saying, okay, let's take the time to play a game with one another, or let's take the time to socialize. You've seen where sort of breastfeeding mothers and are actually sitting there with their phone, and you read a lot nowadays about where the parent is not always engaged with the child, because back in the day, before phones, you were actually looking into your child's eye and possibly reading them a lullaby or singing them a lullaby, which helps with their talking skills, all those things. But now it's the phone. So we have to give a little bit of everything to our students. And certainly where we come from, we follow what we call the traditional methods when we were back at school, the reading, the writing, the handwriting, but yet bringing in a little bit of technology to enhance it. Our phones and iPads and things out there should be an enhancer and not to take away from what the child should be doing.
During COVID, those gaps between globally, and you can definitely recognize it here, the gaps between public, private, public schools were closed and are closing because almost the phones became so essential. I know that even our schools here were using them for children were using them for homework. So that went to show that phones are so accessible. Even in the urban, peri-urban areas, you'd find they might even be sharing a phone, but their homework has been sent on the phone. So it's definitely an area we have to look out for. It's at all levels of society. Does anyone want to contribute to that conversation on the digital technology space? Thank you.
With a lot of interaction with digital devices and everything, and by virtue of the fact that you're home when you're accessing these devices, For the parent, speaking from their perspective, the child is always available. So in as much as you lock yourself in your room and you're attending a class, the fact that they can see you there, they know that you're available. Being in a classroom will sort of draw all your attention to school physically. So you'll be able to definitely stay away from your gadgets and you'll be able to pay undivided attention to your books. So I believe as a parent, a guardian, a teacher, you all have to be engaged in the sense that you equally have to learn about technology, because at the end of the day, if the internet is fully open for access, the child can literally do anything. Thank you.
Just to add on, the talks are really educative. They are really incisive. We can actually see the gap, not only with high school students, but it all trickles up to even corporate. We have issues with people forgetting passwords, issues with people actually not knowing how to handle certain tools. So this is why the education sector is very important. We have lots of devices being used, as mentioned, with our kids. And it's up to us to understand what these devices do. We need to also be more proactive in this industry.
Thank you so much. You've taken some words out of my mouth, but I was going to just end on a last point, and I'll ask the panel to close, is just to emphasize on all of us, and no matter what capacity, as parents, as leaders, and as teachers, leaders, adults, to ensure that we develop global citizens of the world, even if we don't know where the world is going. We have a huge responsibility, and I hope we can go away with at least that thought, in that we have so many avenues in which to do that. I would like to end by asking for a few last comments from each member of the panel.
The pace that education is going to evolve at in the next 5-10 years, I think we're going to see exponential growth and development in that. And it's certainly a really exciting stage to be part of it. And I think that's what continues to keep us who've been involved in education for a while now, that still continues to motivate and develop and for us to grow within the industry as well.
And I think we are proud that we're actually starting these conversations. The challenge, as always, will be to produce students who are not only able to read and write, but children who can fit as global citizens.
So hopefully we'll all work together, and we're going to have a fantastic set of career students going forward.
You know, the understanding of technology the children have, I think it cannot speak any further that, education has changed, the student has changed, and our children are more comfortable to speak about how they feel. And I think it's evidence that we're actually moving in the right direction with the well-being, the mental health. It's important to actually be open to know what the child is actually feeling. So I'm happy with where we are as a school and where the world is moving towards education.
I'll just talk to one point. I think that that's very vital in the future of education. There's so much research coming out now about the vitals or importance of early years. From in the womb up to age 5, these are critical in human development. And I think all around the world, a large amount of effort is being put into research and funding of these years. And I think more emphasis in the future will come on the importance of early years, which I certainly agree with. I'd just like to close by saying I think the future of education is bright. I think it's exciting. And that schools are more than institutions that you just see a building across the road and that's a school. For me, a school is a heart of the community. And I'd like to see in the future of education far more interaction, not only with the parents and the students, but with people who live in the locality, in the area of the school, and bringing them in and bringing back a sense of community within our society, which I think has gone missing a little bit. And I think schools play a vital role to bring people together. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to be having more conversations in the future. We hope to share this podcast with you very soon. Thank you very much.